Alrighty. 2 Corinthians 6. I like to align on Paul turning up the screws. I just liked how that kind of placed us at this point of the letter with the false teaching that's going on. But yeah, quite enjoy the intensity of the talk as well. Like there's a challenge in this as well, a conviction for us thinking about ministry and what we guard, like the gospel that we're guarding. It's precious. But yeah, what's been affecting your heart as you're sitting with this part of the letter?
Yeah, look, I think one of the key things for me is Paul's patience with the Corinthians is just excellent. So we're hearing it's the fourth letter after multiple visits. It's the same issues that play time and time again. But rather than just worrying about what do they think of me, he's actually laying some really good foundations about who he and his companions are, what their mission is and what they're on about, and then contrasting that against the super apostles. And so it's just this beautiful picture of a polemic against false teaching, whilst it's also re-establishing his credibility, not with power and authority, but through the law of common sense. It's like, let's just weigh these two groups of people up. This is who we are. And yeah, we don't put stumbling blocks before people. And you know what? Corinthians, you should know this because you are guys who have responded to the gospel effectively because of what me and my companions have done. He's not saying the Holy Spirit didn't do anything there, but it's just awesome to see Paul not just leaning into his authority and go, because I said so. It says, you know what have you observed in us? What are you observing in these false teachers? What have you seen us do with you over time? What have they done? They've left you, they've gone off and done something else.
They take your money.
Take your money and run. It's just a beautiful picture. So look, I think one of the really interesting parts about this, there's a whole bunch of couplets in this passage, which, what's he got? Glory and dishonour, bad reports, good reports, genuine yet regarded as impostors, known yet regarded as unknown, dying yet living on, beaten yet not killed. Like there's just this, it's clear and obvious that they're the good guys. And they're not doing this for selfish reasons to pad their bank accounts or generate esteem, because there is no esteem for Paul. Some of who should be his greatest allies are questioning whether or not he's actually a genuine apostle. And so it's just beautiful to see Paul laying it down. I put this passage in a similar place to when he's going, what are my credentials? Shipwrecked, snake bitten, stoned, but not died. It's ludicrous that they challenge his apostolic authority. But the very thing they're challenging is not the thing that he's leaning into. And so I think that's a beautiful...
beautiful leadership picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
It'd be a very short letter if it was kind of, Paul, the apostle, just stop.
Yeah.
I said so. Lots of love. See you later.
Remember what I told you last time. Peace out.
We'd have very short letters if that were the case. I quite like the... as servants of God, we commend ourselves. Sort of, not as the highly acclaimed so-and-sos who have got, we are far better with our rhetorical speech than these no-hopers, but as servants of God, so he's picked the lowest rung of the ladder and gone, that's where I'll take my place. That's where we actually show who we are and what we're about.
And he obviously is contrasting with the super apostles, but he's also here contrasting with the Corinthians, because in the last bit of verse 13, he goes, I'm speaking to you as children. So he's a servant of God, or that's how he's positioned himself in verse 3 to 11. And then verse 13, he goes, I'm speaking to you as children, open wide your heart to us. That's it's not a hierarchical thing, but it's kind of, he's alluding to their maturity and their discernment and their ability to see what's bleedingly obvious. So it's like
Yeah.
the I like love rugby, right? Taniela Tupou is like this monstrous rugby player who is massive and is fantastic at rugby. If you see him walking along the street, you'd be like, that guy's a unit. I wouldn't want to see him in a dark alley. I certainly wouldn't want to run at him, and I certainly wouldn't want to have to try and tackle him. But my kids would go, "Who's that? Is he good at rugby? Is he?" You go, "Come on, kids.
Come on.
I'm speaking to you as children. Yes, he's a good rugby player. Don't try and tackle him. That would be stupid."
Yeah.
What should be plainly obvious from observing the realities of what's going on is not necessarily plain to children.
Yeah.
And so, and sorry, there's many biblical images about kids like having faith like a child and they're in a really positive light. But this illusion is saying, listen, there's not a lot of discernment, there's not a lot of maturity. What you're actually doing is failing to recognise what's plainly obvious from all the data that's been presented to you.
Yeah.
So he's like, as he goes, commending ourselves, trouble, hardship, distress, beatings, imprisonment, riots, hard work, sleepless nights, hunger, purity, understanding, patience, kindness. Like all those things should be plainly obvious to the Corinthians that these guys are on
The
the
real
right
deal.
team.
Yeah.
Or at least even if they're not the real deal, they are sufficiently convicted by the message that they're carrying that they're willing to endure all these kinds of things. They're certainly not doing it out of self-serving mechanism or for self-serving reasons, like the super apostles are doing. And so that contrast is just a beautiful picture as to Paul, and even like he's written this fourth letter to the Corinthian church. He didn't go, right, I wrote your first letter, you haven't fixed yourself, so right, you're out of the kingdom, you're out of my affections. I'm trying to get to Rome. You guys are delaying me time and time again. I'm just going to dust the dust off my shoes. And go and talk to someone who's actually going to listen to me. There's this patient pastoral heart that just flows through. As like his letters are dripping with this pastoral care. And this concern for who they are and what they're doing. So they're not just they're not just allowed to get away with living as they once did in those idolatries, which he then pivots to in the next part of the passage. But yeah, it's just all out of this pastoral heart and love for his people in Corinth. I love that.
It's such a high value on what, like Paul's vision for the church is a really high bar of what the costs of relationships together is, and seemingly there's a significant threshold like that's key for Paul before he's going to cut the cord, like whatever that might be. He doesn't actually allude to that. He doesn't say like, if you don't do this and this and this, it's over. He's not holding a gun to their head or it's I'm not going anywhere and I'm not letting this
it's 3 strikes and you're out. There isn't going to be no 3 Corinthians.
That's true. Was this the part where you had you had a line about integrity and just that reflection on like that reflection, Paul's integrity, and for us, like what would you be willing to sacrifice for your integrity? Because I think that's a different question to the typical one that's like, what would you sacrifice for the gospel? Take up your cross and follow me, and are you prepared to die for the faith? That's a different question to that.
So look, I think Paul is saying we put no stumbling block before people because we want them to see the gospel. And the logical extension of that is the hardship and the imprisonments and the beatings. And so because of his integrity and the desire for people to hear the gospel and to remove the barriers to that and the stumbling blocks, he's willing to endure hardships, beatings, sleepless nights, hard work, all these kind of things. And so I think that raises for us the question: what would we be willing to endure? Is the positively framed way of thinking about it. But the opposite is where are you vulnerable to actually slipping in your integrity? Where are the barriers that you're not putting because you want them to trip over, but it's usually external pressures that push you into that space. at work, you go. Sorry, my work, I'm allowed to talk about Jesus quite a lot, and it's even encouraged. So
Indeed,
I'm lucky in that regard. You too.
Yeah.
But in some workplaces, talking about Jesus can have consequences such as losing jobs or losing promotions or socially isolating yourself or having an impact on interpersonal relationships, which might affect productivity or workflow or any number of things. And so when someone asks you a direct question about Jesus, flooding through your mind at that point is, I would love to talk to you about Jesus, but I'm concerned that I have a mortgage payment coming up and I don't want to lose my job. At that point, you go, well, can we talk about this after work? That might be entirely appropriate, but that might also be a stumbling block for that person because they're like, well, I won't care after work. I care now. And here's the moment that God's orchestrated for us to have a conversation. But my own, the risks to me are high. And so I've got to weigh that up and think about what I value, what's important to me, and what the consequences of my choices are. Paul is a fantastic example of not caring what happens to your personal self for the sake of the gospel. And he has got like extreme fervour. And I admire and love Paul's fervour in the way that he actually cares for and supports the gospel going out at great personal expense. But I'm hazarding a guess that most of us are going to be slightly less fervent for the gospel than Paul is. And obviously there's a broad spectrum of the amount of energy that we're willing to expend. And yeah, I just think at some point there's a line where integrity finishes and compromise begins. And so yeah, just wanting to think about what it is, where are we willing to compromise? Does God want us to lose the job? Or is that actually not helpful in the proclamation of the gospel? And just weighing up, what does our conscience and our integrity actually determine that we should be doing? And so if you are absolutely convicted that you need to share the gospel with someone and they directly ask you a question about the gospel, weigh the consequences, absolutely. But are those consequences worth it for that particular opportunity to share the gospel? Paul would say, absolutely. Shipwrecked, bitten by snakes, stoned, we assume executed. He didn't even value his life highly enough to stop him from having gospel integrity. I think that's a really good challenge for us. And look, I always think there's two types of examples that we see. There's the example that we can follow, and then there's the example that we think, oh, this is just too good, too big, too powerful. I'd never live up to that standard. And I guess I want us to be encouraged not to see Paul as an exemplar who can't be followed, but as an ideal to strive towards. And so having integrity in all of having gospel integrity in all of our interactions is absolutely critical. Often we're going to, it's entirely reasonable that someone avoids a gospel conversation in a workplace so that they don't lose their job. I'm not going to say they're a bad person because they've failed to put everything on the line for the gospel. But in that particular space, there's a consequence and a cost that needs to be considered at the very least. And thinking about ways that you can share the gospel. And so maybe it's not during work time on work premises. Maybe it's finding different ways to relationally connect with that person and find opportunities outside of work times or off premises or whatever it is. But yeah, that gospel integrity really underpins the way that we operate. And we're not all going to be a Paul. Some of us are going to be a Titus. Some of us are going to be a Barnabas. Some of us are going to be a Lydia. Some of us are going to be clean toilets. Like there's a broad spectrum of the ways that we can serve the gospel and have gospel integrity. But yeah, I want us to just consider what it looks like in our lives to have gospel integrity and not just assume someone else will do the evangelism.
Mm.
Someone else will disciple people. Someone else will have conversations. But it is our responsibility to have gospel integrity everywhere that we go.
Maybe that's the right response off the back of, I guess, what last week dipped into with the reality of judgment. And whereas for the Corinthians, in a sense, Paul wasn't saying, look, you're on the precipice of being damned here.
Yeah.
But there was still a holding to account that, like, if we stand before a holy God and if we live our days before a holy God and we're going to spend eternity with him, we'll have to give an answer for what we've done on this side of glory. And it just strikes me, I guess, not much different to the world of Corinth. I think we had a line in our Judges series that was sort of like, idolatry begins with compromise, and sort of there are the very black and white sins that you can earmark as that's danger zone. If you fall into that territory, you've really shipwrecked your faith.
Yeah.
But if I'm hearing you right as well, there's actually a space, wisdom space, a discernment space to recognize, what are the footholds in my heart that have already been captured by the ways of the world, that have already caused my gospel heart to become compromised in some way, and therefore to lack integrity. I remember, I think there was a line about the Corinthians. I think there was a saying back then that was something about to be a Corinthian. That was a line, which was like a shorthand way of describing someone who's a bit sleazy or like clamoring for the world. There was something about that because Corinth just had a reputation as being that kind of a place in a way. So it sort of strikes me that the Corinthian church, I guess, in some ways, I guess you would say they're still baby Christians, like you were talking about. They are children. In a way, they kind of literally are baby Christians. They've only been Christians for a few years, and I guess it's a kind of picture of Christian maturity for them. They're still quite enamored with the ways of Corinth. They're the ways that they pine for glory or successful leaders. These look like this looks like Corinth. So to be a non-Christian or whatever, to walk into the church of Corinth, you wouldn't particularly notice anything different from, which is, I think that's the real, like, that's the sadness to the threat of a church, our witness, our gospel message, and I guess even in our own relationships, like if integrity is compromised, there's a lot to rebuild from there. Like
I think that's why he pivots in verse 14 where he does, because what does it look like to have gospel integrity? It's to look distinct, to be set apart. I like to talk about it in terms of being a conspicuous Christian.
Salt.
Be salty and lighty. But it's amazing what distinction actually communicates. And so maintaining gospel integrity is more than just actively communicating the gospel, which is important. There's also integrity in that particular space as well. So one of the spaces I operate in, like in the rugby community in general, I'm conspicuous as someone who doesn't swear and is not predisposed to drunkenness. And so I look different to the community in that I don't swear. And so do I not swear because I don't know the words? No. Do I not swear because I would feel silly saying those things in public? No. Why do I not swear? Well, because I think it's important to be intentional with the words that come out of your mouth, and I think there's lots of wonderful adverbs and adjectives that we can use as suitable substitutes. But the conspicuousness in that space goes, there's something different about the way that you operate, because you're not constantly reaching for expletives to express your emotion. There's something different about the way you operate in that space. And that conspicuousness doesn't communicate that I'm a Christian and I love Jesus and that he died so that I could be in relationship. But it does mark you as strange or odd or distinct. and that piques curiosity. And so lots of people go, oh, I've noticed you don't really swear. Why is that? And that then provides opportunities to have further gospel integrity in explicit communication of the gospel or values or framework or whatever it is that you're talking about. But that conspicuousness sets you apart from others within whatever community that you're part of, which is, it's not gospel proclamation, but it is connected to us. And that conspicuousness is what I think Paul's going on there. Like, don't be yoked together with unbelievers. And like, we did that to death yesterday in terms of, it's not about marriage to non-believers, even though, again, that's not... it's good advice not to marry. It's good advice. Don't marry a non-Christian. But that's not the primary application of what this is going on. The yoke image of having two oxen or cows or farm animals, whatever it is, joined together, strapped in. And so what happens there is they go shoulder to shoulder and they're working together. And from the outside, you look at that and you don't go, oh, look at those two unique oxen that are trying to achieve different objectives, and they clearly have different frameworks, and the left cow, they're a really solid person with integrity, and the right cow, well, they're a self-serving hypocrite. No, you go, look, they're one package. They're the work party that's ploughing the ground or carrying the load or ferrying the people or whatever it is that they're doing. And so Paul here is saying, don't align yourself and share the load with people who are outside of the kingdom. And so, don't be seen. Be distinct and set apart. Don't be strapped together and pushing in the same direction.
Yeah, I hear the warning in that, in the sense of, like, it's that thread of idolatry is actually enslaving. To be yoked to something actually, like, cements you into a certain course. I think if I've got a memory that, like, it would be the more experienced bull or whatever that would take the younger, and then you yoke them together, and that's the training for the younger. Because Jesus uses that same metaphor for discipleship, like, take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, like quite subverting the picture of that enslaved. But that's discipleship, being yoked. So it's the warning that if you're yoked to idols or darkness or Satan, like, you're giving your heart over.
You're dragged alongside. You're being formed and discipled in idolatry, and you are wearing a path of destruction for others, ploughing to sow seeds of darkness and Belial. I don't think that's in our core business as a church. And so it makes entire sense. So you go, if through idolatry we're strapping ourselves to to non-Christians, to darkness, to evil, whatever it is, we're absolutely doing the wrong thing. I think it's really important. Like I mentioned a couple of different, social justice, right? I really like that the lowest, the last, and the least are cared for. I think that's really important, and I highly value humans being treated with respect and dignity and care. Love it, no problem. Part of our core business as a church is not primarily social justice. Can we be involved in social justice? Absolutely. Is it our core business? I don't think so. We are to be, as the passage says, we are the temple of God, the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. Collectively, we are a beacon of light. We should be putting our lamp on a hill. We should be showing light in darkness. We should be salty and lighty. That's who we should be. That's our core business. Does that mean that we can engage in social justice? Absolutely, as secondary or tertiary. But our primary role is to be the temple of God, to be connected to God in prayer, in the preaching of the word, in discipleship, in healthy relationships, in calling people to repentance, or like all these things are our primary objectives. And our secondary and tertiary goals can happen, provided they are hierarchically submitted to our primary goals of being the temple of God. That should be our first and foremost goal always. But as we yoke ourselves to different organisations, we can actually find our hierarchy inverted and the social justice becomes primary at the expense of the gospel. And we've seen that happen in a number of different denominations through Australian church history and around the world. And that is that's an awful place to start heading down. Not because I don't want people cared for, because as soon as we fail to execute our primary mission, we're useless as an organisation. And yeah, sorry, I don't like the word organisation. We're like as a church, as the temple of God, we've got to do our primary job, right? Like if you're a postie, your primary job is to deliver the mail. If you go, oh, but I can have a pastoral care visit to someone who lives on my route, you go, yeah, you can, but if you don't deliver all your letters during the round, you're going to be in trouble with the boss. And so as Christians, our job is to deliver the mail of the gospel to people inside and outside the kingdom, inside and outside our church. If we're sidestepping to do other things that aren't of primary importance at the expense of doing our main game, we'll be in trouble with the boss. Like Jesus wants us to do things in a particular way, which is outlined super clearly in the Bible. We shouldn't prioritise secondary and tertiary things over primary things. And the easiest way to do that is to yoke ourselves to non-Christian organisations. I think often we can think about things like funding models and all sorts of stuff, and how we allow we're getting money off the government to do certain things, but education or charity concessions or any number of things like that. I often wonder, you go, right, are we actually
tethering ourselves
or yoking ourselves to
Caesar?
That's something that I want to continue to ponder. Particularly as we're thinking about how our denomination works going into the future. You go, is it? Are we going to be tethering ourselves to government organisations whose primary objective is certainly not to be the temple of God? Are we actually getting alongside and heading in a bad direction in those particular spaces? And I love how Paul actually gets us to think about that. Is that an expression of idolatry, or is that the cost of doing business in Australia? Which is something I think all our denominational heads should be thinking about, because it's an important consideration. And the last thing I want us to be doing is yoking ourselves to evil and ploughing the ground to sow the seeds of destruction in the future.
This chapter has that warning over it, doesn't it? That there's only one thing that the church can do that can't be done anywhere else. It's the work of the gospel. And so if the church muddies the waters or whatever, so there's always that reflection of where are we at in that stage of church health for us, so that there is no stumbling block, and our practices together are only opening the doors for the gospel work in our community and the gospel work we're all each engaged in our relationships or workplaces.
So I think I think we're supposed to be distinct. Come out from them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch no unclean thing, and I'll receive you. I'll be your father. You'll be my sons and daughters. There's an intentional distinction between the church and the world. And that's not to say that we don't have mission to the world. That's not to say we don't go and have gospel integrity in different organisations, workplaces, community groups, social gatherings. We're still in those spaces, but tying ourselves and yoking ourselves together is that's a one-way ticket to bad places. I just think that first verse in chapter 7. That kind of last verse of this week's passage is really helpful in terms of reiterating his commitment to both soul and spirit, or body and spirit. Soul and spirit similar, but the physical and the spiritual are both of importance to the Christian. And he's critiquing the Greek way of thinking that the body is bad, the spirit is good. We'll flee the body when we die, and then the spirit will be set free. So you only need to worry about spiritual matters. The physical body is not a problem.
Yeah.
And Paul's saying, not correct.
That Gnostic dualism feeds back into the integrity thing. 'Cause
Yeah.
every time there's compromise with sin, there's always some thought that this thing here doesn't affect my faith, like, or it doesn't shake who I think God is, or da 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 da. Like that sort of negotiation into compromise is a version of that same. I can do what I want with my body. It doesn't affect my spirit, or my heart is still true. Like da da da, all that sort of thing. He's poking at that.
You strap yourself to evil, and you are trained and formed in that way as you're yoked, heading in an evil direction. That will take you in bad places. Even if it's purely physical or purely spiritual. Paul's again reminding us that both are of utmost importance in the life of the believer. We have the same expressions of this same problem today. The physical and the spiritual are separated. And we see that in a number of ways. We give hundreds of different examples. But what you do in your body... So like things like having a good night's sleep is not a bad thing. In fact, it's a positive thing because God has designed our bodies to need sleep. Cutting sleep short is not a helpful thing. Sure, you might get an extra couple of hours to do the assignment, or you might get to watch an extra show, or you might get to scroll mindlessly for another 45 minutes. But having a sleep is actually a really good, positive body thing that actually enables our bodies to function the way that God wants them to in the 16 hours awake, 8 hours of sleep. If we pretend that we are purely spiritual, sleep doesn't matter. Who cares? I'll catch up later. I'll rest when I'm dead. Like all these kind of negative things that we come across. But they should be treated with importance in the same way that my spiritual health is important. My physical health is also important. Which includes sleep, eating, exercise, like all those kind of things.
That's the question: is there integrity between my outer world and my inner world, my physical life and my spiritual life in that sense?
And so I do think that this passage it's implicit, but it invites us to go, what are we yoking ourselves to, and what does that work look like? Because you're going to be yoked to someone. You can't serve two different masters. And so if we have taken Jesus' invitation up to be yoked to him, and he's the more mature one that's actually discipling us and forming us and taking us and training us, that's infinitely better than all the alternatives. And so I think that just that gives me the reminder that, hey, as I am yoked to Jesus, what is he teaching me? How is he forming me? What is the work that we are doing together, led by him? He's the one that's actually taking the load. Like it's little brother, big brother. And the big brother's doing most of the work. In many respects, we're just along for the ride, but we've been welcomed into being co-workers as we plough the ground for Christ and he sows his seeds. We actually, that's a really positive thing. But we've only got one self, and we can only do one job at a time. And so, are we strapping ourselves to evil, or are we strapping ourselves to Jesus? And so I go, that's a no-brainer. I know which one's better. But what is my life? When I actually look at my life, what does my life say about who I am currently yoked to? And how do we make sure that we're actually heading in a good direction rather than being directed and led and formed by evil?
Good challenge there.